Alright, welcome back to Roguetech, and welcome back to the Comprehensive Guide series. So, today we're going to be taking a look at the Mechbay.
Commander. Pretty great.
So,
right?
I know the Mechbay can be a little intimidating to anyone who's not, like, really well versed in the Battletech games up to this point, but for everyone else, it's pretty familiar. So, in Roguetech, you have your first bay of 6 mechs that you can have active, repairing, refitting, dropping, etc. And then as you upgrade to Mechbay 2 and Mechbay 3, you gain 6 additional slots for each. Some people play keeping 4, maybe 5 or 6 mechs total ready to drop at any given time. That's not my playstyle. I like to have a wide variety of mechs available to drop on different missions, drop whenever stuff's being repaired or whatever. But it is worth noting the more mechs you do have readied and available to drop, the higher your financial report costs are. So you are then required to drop more frequently, and it takes more money to travel between places. But yeah, you also have the vehicle bays that also get expanded, and the battle armor bays that get expanded as you upgrade to Mechbay 2 and Mechbay 3. But the key things to note in this particular screen, the starting, like the base Mechbay screen, you'll notice the timeline, funds, all the stuff on the left is all the same. But here in the center is the real meat of the Mechbay outside of refitting a single mech. You are able to see all the mechs you have. You can drag and drop to rearrange them, unless I think there's like an auto sorting option that auto sorts. But you can. I like to group them based on like what role they fill, but you know you can also group them by whatever their drop tonnage is, which is what that number in the corner of their portrait is. That is a 55-ton mech, a 50-ton mech, etc. And you can also see that for the vehicles and the battle armor. I think the battle armor bay is also for proto mechs, which is just like small mechs, rather than battle armor, which is basically just glorified infantry. So that's this main mech bay part. Then there's also the storage part, which this is where you have any partial mech or vehicle salvage that you've gotten through missions, through salvage in missions, and you can either view them all, you can just look at the particular chassis classes, but they're always listed, I believe, in order of tonnage and value. So if you have 3 20-ton mechs, they should be in order of value, I believe. Kind of hard to extensively test that, but it's close enough. I'm going to go on a couple of missions with the Comprehensive Guide series towards the end of it. And hopefully I'll be able to get enough parts for me to show you what it looks like when you can build. It's kind of hard to just like imagine, but if you have parts, any salvage here, when you click on one of the salvage pieces, on the right you'll see a rough breakdown of what the salvage is, and at the bottom you'll see percentages of how likely any location is to be in good repair when you build it. And that is based on your mech tech. But again, I'm gonna wait to really dive into that until we actually have mech salvage to look at. And then the third tab here is components. I honestly have no idea what point this serves. You can sort it by, weapons, ammo, equipment. There's a couple of breakdowns here where you can, look and see what kind of heat sinks you have or whatever. But I feel like it's just faster to just go into a mech and see it on the left. It gives you more breakdown. It lets you see, what is value or what is able to be installed in the mech and whatnot. But more importantly, it's just you can break it down much more, granularly to see exactly what components, what weapons, and whatnot you have. And then other than that, over here in the mech bay, back in the just default view, you'll see on the right a breakdown of whatever unit you currently have selected. So this bushwhacker is the BSW HR, the high roller. You can see its different, guesstimate traits. The only ones that are really like noteworthy here is the heat efficiency and movement, but I'll go through those in a second. So you have the picture of the mech. There is two, I think, options of how you want it to look when you install Roguetech. This is just the default one. The name, the number here is the base initiative just from the tonnage. So you'll see the base initiative for the Bushwhacker is a 17. And the base initiative for the Hornet is 13. Which seems weird to me. But no, that's actually... that seems backwards. Unless... no, lower tonnage mechs have lower base initiative? That's backwards from what I thought. Huh. Things I learned. Interesting. In any case, that's what that number is. That's the base initiative that if you have no bonuses from tactics, no reductions from variants, that you can reduce the variance with piloting. But that's just the base from just the tonnage. I believe the engine core size also plays a role. I don't know how. Initiative's one of those things that I just kind of take as it comes and don't try to optimize really. I just kind of play the cards I'm dealt. You'll see the... also, if you rename the mech, so if you go into the refit, we'll get to this in a second, but say I rename it to the ABA. And now it's going to show the rename there instead of all that it said before. But you'll still be able to see the chassis type and the particular chassis variant next to it here, even after you rename them. Directly underneath that is the paper doll. This is the exact same paper doll you'll see whenever you're in combat. And you can just hover to see the breakdown. When you're not hovering anything, this is the total structure and total armor of the entire mech. Now, worth noting, this does include the rear armor, so you don't actually have 100 or 840 armor plates if you're facing an enemy mech. You have whatever 840 minus 85, 90, 120. So you would actually only have 720 armor with this Bushwhacker if you're facing the enemy, if you're getting hit only from the front. Yeah, I really should just stop trying to talk over the NPCs. I think I have the volume low enough that it's not a problem, but I'm going to try to not do that moving forward. Anyway, so if you're facing the enemy, your front armor, and also that includes the 45 plates in the head. So technically, you have 165 less armor than what it shows here on this particular mech to be shot in the front. Wow, so much chatter. Okay. There's probably a setting to disable the chatter, or at least minimize it. I should look into that. In any case, so what I'm trying to say still is this total armor amount, while it's useful for kind of comparing between different mechs, if you have a mech that only has, 40 rear armor total because it's a very, very backline mech and you don't ever intend for anything to get behind it, then you could actually have more front-facing armor on that mech than on a similar mech that has a bigger number here. So, this number does include all the armor across the entire mech. And now that I've made that point abundantly clear, the paper doll is a good chance to discuss exactly how damage is applied to the armor and structure. If you're getting hit in any location, obviously that location will take that damage. If your arm is destroyed, the arm transfers to the to the side torso, and that side torso transfers to the center torso. Likewise, if a leg gets destroyed, any damage that would go to that leg goes to the side torso and then to the center torso. So the side torsos can be destroyed much more quickly than you would expect if you lose either an arm or a leg. And it's also worth noting that any crits that occur in a destroyed component, so if you've lost your right arm and they get a crit that should have gone to the right arm, that crit will transfer to the next location even if you still have armor in that location. So if you lose an arm and they crit the arm that is missing, that crit, even if you still have full armor on the side torso, that crit will go to the side torso. This is part of the reason, which we'll get to optimizing mechs in a bit, probably in a separate guide. But this is part of the reason why having, for example, ammo in the side torso is potentially more dangerous than having it in the leg. So, there's also different hit chances for each location. That we'll cover once we start dropping into actual missions. But just for now, know that arm transfers to side torso and leg transfers to side torso, and then side torso transfers to center torso. Also, when you're facing away from the enemies completely and they're in your back, the damage will either hit the rear armor, left, right, or center, or the arms or legs. So it is possible to still get hit places other than your rear armor if you're getting shot from behind. If you're getting shot from the side or the front, they cannot hit your rear armor. Unless it's a splash weapon, but that's a niche situation. Just in general, if they're shooting you from the front or the side, it will not strike the back armor. Which is why sometimes, depending on what you're building, stripping a little bit of tonnage off the back armor can be a viable idea. But also, I guess I'll go ahead and cover it here. The way it works is if you're getting shot from the front, the highest hit chance for shots from the front are on the center torso. Next highest is side torsos, and then the arms and legs, I believe, have about the same chance to hit. We'll look at offensive push at some point and go over more precise numbers, but the center torso you always want to have the most armor because it is the most likely to get hit if you're being shot from the front. If you're being shot from the side, another one of those. Alright, that's a lot of chatter. I'm sure there's a setting to disable it. I should definitely do that. But if you're getting shot from the side, the arm and leg on that side are the most likely to be hit. The side torso is the next most likely to be hit. And the center torso is the least likely to be hit, but can still be hit on either side. So if you're getting shot from the right, or if you're getting shot from the left, your center torso can still take damage, which, once more, you want to have more armor on the center torso than anywhere else, because it is the location that is most likely to be hit from any direction other than the back. Just over, well, I guess not most. I think my point is made. I think it's clear what I'm saying, is like there's no way to turn away and not get your center torso hit. Whereas if your arm, leg, and side torso get opened on one side, you can just pivot around and twist so that the enemy is hitting you from the other side. But if the center is open, the only way to not get hit in the center at all is to turn around completely and have them shooting you in the back. And we'll get to accuracy bonuses and all sorts of things once we get into actual missions. So that's this portion. This, next to it, is the hard points that this chassis has. Now, if there is an Omni-Mech, which I don't think we have any Omni-Mechs. No. Okay. So if there's an Omni-Mech, you'll be able to tell in this glance, or, just glancing at this, that it is an Omni-Mech because it will have, instead of it being, 3 ballistic, 4 energy, 1 missile, whatever, it's going to all be the same number of max, because Omni-Mechs don't care what type of weapon you put in each location for the most part. So if it says 3 out of 16, 2 out of 16, or whatever, if the numbers, I feel like the chatter is much more frequent than it used to be. Because that's like the, 6th, 7th time in 15 minutes? Huh. I'm gonna have to look at my Roguetech install. I will definitely make a notation or comment on the next episode of the comprehensive guide if there is an option. I'm pretty sure there is. I think I've seen it before. I should do that. Anyway, So Omnimechs will have the same number of max hard points, and you can only have that many weapons total. But each location will also blah, 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 blah. We'll get to that in a second. But if it doesn't have the same number of max across the board or whatever, then this means that there is only 3 slots, or 3 limbs, locations that can have ballistic weapons, 4 that can have energy, 1 that can have a missile, and 1 that can have a support hardpoint across the entire thing. The 0 out of 20 jump jets, I don't think that's, like... Here you see 7 out of 20, but I'm pretty sure this is max 7 because of the engine core. Yeah. So, the max number is weird, but it will show you how many jump jets a mech has. So, this Hornet has 3 jump jets. Another. Actually, you know what? Is there just a setting in the settings? Gameplay. No. Okay. I don't know what I just did, but I'll find out when I restart the game. Anyway, back to the Mechbay. So yeah, this is just a listing of a quick glance at what hardpoints are available and what weapon types are currently equipped. And then the jump jets just shows how many jump jets, and I guess 20 is just the max you can possibly have with a 400 core on a 20-tonner or something. I don't know. I don't know where the 20 comes from. Then, bottom left corner. So, close range, medium range, and long range. For a quick glance, you can kind of see like what it does. I've noticed these numbers are kind of weird. So like, the fact that it says 299 melee damage is not accurate, I don't believe. Unless that's like the charge damage specifically. But it, as you can see here, it says that includes weapons capable of firing below 90 meters. But it says ranged damage 0. But this thing definitely has weapons that can fire below 90 meters. So these things are kind of weird. I just ignore them for the most part. Especially if you're like just trying to figure out what your mech does. Just ignore those 3. It's better to look at the individual weapon systems you have equipped to figure out exactly what your mech's doing. Heat efficiency, on the other hand, is very important. So I'm going to break this down very slowly and very specifically. The heat sinking is the number of heat units in a standard biome that you will drop per turn, assuming you have no effects generating heat, and assuming you do not have any crits to your engine and have not lost any heat sinks. So that heat sinking number is only a very accurate number in that situation, that you are fresh or relatively fresh, that you haven't taken any crits to anything that impacts cooling, and you're in a standard biome. The Alpha Strike, likewise, is the amount of heat you generate if you fire every single weapon in the mech at its base shots. So some weapons, like rotary autocannons, for example, you can actually fire more times than what the weapon's breakdown shows, and any additional shots generate additional heat. So just because your Alpha Strike number is lower than your heat sinking number, based on what weapons you have equipped to the mech, your actual Alpha Strike heat generation may be higher. It's also worth noting if you have any kind of streak weapon. Yeah, I promise I'm going to get that sorted by the next episode. So just bear with me for this one, I apologize. But the Alpha Strike, if you're using streak weapons, which streak is they only fire if they get a full lock-on, and every shot is going to hit. If they do not fire, they do not generate heat, which is one of the biggest advantages of streak weapons, is conservation of heat and conservation of ammo when you aren't hitting your targets. And again, this Alpha Strike amount can be changed by factors such as the environment you're dropping in, such as if you're getting hit by any kind of TSEMP or mag pulse ammo or anything like that that increases heat generation. This number can be changed in the middle of a fight. So it's generally a good idea to try to get the heat sinking to be equal to or slightly above the Alpha Strike amount, just so that you don't run into situations where you're dropping in a hot biome and you're having to keep half of your weapons off the entire fight. So, another thing to keep in mind with the heat sinking and the Alpha Strike is there's 3 states. Heat neutrality, which is when you're heat neutral, that means your heat sinking and your Alpha Strike are equal. And again, that's after considering if you're firing something more than it's listed at or whatnot. Alternate fire modes also often generate extra heat. But if, based on whatever weapons you're running, if you're sinking the exact amount you need to Alpha Strike, that's considered being heat neutral. And it is possible to be heat neutral in one biome, but not in another. For example, if you have, I think it's 20% additional heat is it generated or less sink? I think it's 20% in deserts. So if you're in a desert biome, I believe that generates 20% additional heat, or it reduces cooling by 20%. I don't remember which, but it's effectively the same thing. Well, I guess not. No, it wouldn't be the same thing, because if you're getting hit with heat damage, then you can't stop that by not shooting all your weapons. So reduced sinking is actually more penalizing than increased heat generation. So that's worth noting. In any case, so if you're heat neutral in a hot biome where you have heat sinking that is 20% higher than your full Alpha Strike, that just means with heat neutral, if you're not crit, if you're not taking any heat damage from any sources, you will be able to fire every weapon every time without generating any persistent heat. Likewise, if you have a heat delta, which is where your Alpha Strike is larger than your heat sinking, then you will generate that much heat per round that you're firing everything that will persist to the next round and can build up quite a bit. And that's where heat levels, which I'm going to jump heat, I'm going to skip for just a second, but heat levels shows at 42 on this mech, you are hitting the red line. What the red line means is, in addition to the penalties for the heat itself, your mech has a chance to shut down and a smaller chance for any ammo in it to explode. So you want to try to stay at or below that heat level at all times. If you're ever above it, which there are situations where you just really need to get that last shot in to potentially kill somebody, and you're willing to risk shutting down or having your ammo blow, then that's the range where you'll be, working with trying to mitigate the risk in exchange for the reward. 150 heat there, the second number in that heat level, is just shut down. Like, your mech is guaranteed, if it reaches that threshold, to just shut down. Even if it's on an enemy turn and they just hit you with enough heat for you to get to 150, you will just shut down. And that comes with all sorts of issues of its own. Worth noting, your ammo can only cook off at the end of your turn, not at the start or during an enemy turn. So it doesn't matter if you're shut down and you have insane amounts of heat, you still have the opportunity to either eject or jettison your ammo before it blows. and I'll show you how to jettison ammo in a mission, but just understand that that is an option if you, for whatever reason, would like, if you're getting hit with a lot of heat damage, you always have the option on your turn to jettison your ammo before it blows up. And then finally, the jump heat. The jump heat is just how much heat jumping is going to generate, I believe, only if you jump to the maximum range. Don't quote me on that. I don't use jump jets terribly often, but I believe that's the amount of heat you'll generate if you jump to the longest range you can with the jump jets you have equipped. You do generate less heat the closer the jump is. But last note on the heat efficiency before I move on is the heat levels very much coincide with the heat delta or overcooling of your mech. So if you're overcooling by 3 in a standard biome, any heat damage you take, any persistent heat you have at the end of your round, and it is at the end of your turn that you drop heat based on your sinking. So you can actually overheat and potentially blow ammo, then your cooling drops. But that's one of those things where sometimes it acts in a slightly weird order. But just generally be careful with the red line. But in this particular setup, as it is right here, we have a heat delta of 17. And what that means is round 1, we will end the round, again, assuming a standard biome, assuming that we're firing everything and taking no heat damage, etc. We'll generate 17 persistent heat each round that we shoot everything. So, first round 17, second round 34, third round will be passing the red line. So at that point, we would definitely want to either not fire everything to cool down a bit, or at least maintain the heat level, or potentially go red line and risk the penalties of that. Actually, I will make one more note before I move on, which I'll cover in more depth once we drop into missions. But heat does have penalties that are based on the amount of heat. So even if you're not at the 42 heat for the red line, that just means you're not going to shut down or explode. You can still have and will rack up penalties as your heat climbs. The most noticeable of which is your speed, your maximum speed that you can travel will be reduced, which means you'll also generate less evasion. So especially on a very mobile mech that's entire survivability is its evasion, for example, a 20-ton mech, having a heat delta at all is very dangerous, because if you start getting higher heat, say in the 30s, even though you're not redlining, you're still very much slowing yourself down, potentially losing multiple chevrons of evasion, at which point it will be considerably easier to hit you. And when you're running a 20-tonner, as you can see, you don't have much armor. And even if you know, and the armor, once it's shredded through, you don't have much structure either. The arm here, 45 damage, and it's gone. So, very much keep that in mind with the heat. Generally speaking, just very vaguely and generally, it's always better to overcool than to have a heat delta. At the very least, if you don't really know what you're doing. I personally, in some situations, kind of like making hot builds that have a little bit of a heat delta, or taking advantage of having overcooling and purposely going to a planet that, or a system that has mostly, you know, desert and moon and Martian biomes. Now then, after that comes the movement. We'll get into the specifics of how the movement is calculated once we go into the actual Mechbay chassis refit screen. But just the breakdown of this particular little screen is the rating, the number of ticks you see here, is the base move speed. So right now, with the current engine core equipped on this particular mech, the max move is 125 meters, which comes to about 5 hexes. That's also the TT walk MP. I believe that's tabletop walk movement points, which has, as far as I know, no real bearing on the game. It's just there. Max jump, you'll see. Actually, that's weird. Why do we have jump heat? It says 9 jump heat, but we have no jump jets on this mech. Yeah, once again, I don't use jump jets super frequently. Alright, so yeah, I don't know why it says 9 jump heat when we don't have the ability to jump. Whatever. But here the max move is 5 hexes. The max sprint is always 150% of your max move. But because of rounding, sometimes it'll be, for example, 5.7, sometimes it'll be 5.8. But the thing that's actually the 150%, you'll see it's... Oh my god, another one? You know, drop a comment if they've been that common in the other guide videos, because, like, I have not noticed them being this frequent before. I don't know if something maybe got messed up in the files that keep track of how frequently they play those, but yeah, that's crazy. Anyway, so the 125 meters there is the thing that is multiplied by 1.5 to get the 187 meters for the max sprint. And then that is translated to hexes. Movement is completely dependent on the type of terrain you're moving through, the elevation change of the different hexes to each other. So if you're going uphill in rough terrain, your movement is going to be much more limited than the 125 meters there. Likewise, if you're going downhill in roads, or on roads, for example, your movement will actually be higher than what's stated there. So this is not a every single time you move your mech, this is what you can move. Even if you're at 0 heat, this is just dependent on what type of hexes you're moving through. And then, as I said just previously, as you build up heat, these numbers will get smaller. And like I said, we'll look at how this gets calculated in just a second. But that's the breakdown of the movement summary. Durability, I don't really look at it much. It seems weird sometimes. The 840 armor, 436 structure. I have no idea why that's showing 20 less structure than this little bar up here. I don't understand. Like, it can't be the head being excluded because that's 16 structure. I don't know why it's 20 lower. At all. The damage reduction, I don't know why it says 1%. For all intents and purposes, this mech should not have damage reduction. So, I don't know what that's on about. The defense is accurate. It does have 1 defense from the narrow low profile quirk. So, that's accurate. And the max evasive pips, that's not accurate either. Well, okay, no, I take that back. It's accurate, it's just misleading. So, max evasive pips is different than evasion generated. So, max evasion, by default across the board, is 6. This is showing that max evasion, but with a 5.7 move sprint, you will never reach 6 evasion in any situations, unless you just have a bunch of bonuses from like your Mechwarrior and stuff. So like the max evasive pips, that would be much more useful if it showed how many evasion pips you get from sprinting, for example, or something, but that's whatever. And then the stability unsteady thresholds. At 100 stability, your mech will fall down unless you were not yet knocked unsteady. If you have not been knocked unsteady, as far as I know, they fixed the issue. That used to be, if you got charged despite being steady, you could still be knocked down. That's a melee maneuver. Not super common unless the AI just goes rabid. But I believe they fixed it so that as long as you're steady before you get charged, you don't get knocked down. you just get put immediately to 100, and all it takes is somebody breathing on you to fall over. But, yeah, the unsteady threshold is the more important of the two numbers, because that's the point once you hit that number, not once you go past it, once you hit that number, you get knocked unsteady, which means you lose all evasion, and the following turn, you will not be able to sprint unless you use vigilance, which we'll get to vigilance and offensive push once we get into a mission. But just, that's the important thing there, is as long as you have 40 or less stability, actually I think it's like literally 40.9999 repeating, as long as you have less than that, you still have your evasion, your full evasion, period. Also, if you're familiar with vanilla rather than Roguetech, you do not lose evasion when you get shot at anymore. So that's not a concern. The only way you lose evasion is if you get knocked unsteady by passing that threshold, knocked down, or shut down. But yeah, so every mech, as far as I know, has the max stability of 100. I take that back. There are gyro upgrades that will increase that number, so it's harder to knock you down. I do know the unsteady threshold very much will get changed by the gyro you have equipped. For example, if you have an ultralight gyro, you'll take additional stability damage, as well as having a lower unsteady threshold, versus if you have a Dreadnought gyro, I think Dreadnought gyro increases it. I know a lot of Omni gyros increase the unsteady threshold to 61. But yeah, so that's that summary. And then over here on the right, you can scroll through and look at every single piece of equipment that is installed on the mech, including hovering over them to see the information on that particular weapon system, component, whatnot. So, yeah. The last bit, I'm going to go, once we go into the actual refit screen, we'll look at all that stuff. Because this is literally just a summary. It's the exact information that you can get in the refit screen, but shorthand. It doesn't show you, for example, how many slots each thing takes or whatever. But we'll cover that once we go into refit. And finally down here, the pattern. You can see the pattern is whatever current camo pattern it has. And if you change this down or up, you'll notice that the actual way that the mech is painted will change. And this is for in combat as well as out of combat. So, just if you want to change the look of your mech, that's where you do it. And then these last three buttons. So, first off is this one. This is the scrap button. This means you are throwing the chassis away. The mech's components will be stored, so all of the weapons, equipment, and everything will be put into your mech bay, and its chassis will be removed permanently from your inventory. So you are throwing it into the blender to get this amount of C-bills. The second option is the send to storage. In order to store a battle mech, you have to have repaired all of the damage that is on its structure. It can have 0 armor and still be stored. You just have to have the structure repaired and any destroyed locations fixed. So if you lost an arm, you have to repair that structure damage and and restore the crit shoulder and upper and everything before you can store it. What this does is it takes everything off, it puts it in your storage so that you can then go to storage. Actually, you know what? I'm going to just do it. I'm going to reload the same save anyway, so I'll just show you what it looks like. So whenever you store a mech, it looks like this. This is a complete mech. You see quantity 1. It is completely ready to, at any point, ready up. And this is that screen I was going to get to earlier. We'll come back to it. We'll finish this note because there's just one button left. This is the weapon order button. This is the default order. Oh man, they made it a drag and drop. Cool. So this is, whenever you go into a mission, this is the starting weapon order. This, as a beginning player, isn't going to be very important for you to pay attention to. But if you want to get that, early understanding, the bigger pinpoint weapons should go on top, especially the ones that have higher through armor crit chance, which that is something we'll cover later down the road. But basically, damage number big goes first. Damage number smaller, especially if it's multiple damage instances, like this Ellerin 5, which is 6 damage times 5, goes further down. And the reason you do that is so that you can shred off the armor with the bigger weapons and then potentially get crits with the smaller weapons, especially machine guns. And they also show a breakdown of where each weapon is located so that you can, for example, put your arm-mounted weapons before your torso-mounted weapons, since they'll have higher hit chance as long as you have lower arms. Anyway, so that's the weapon order button. And that is this entire interface. Now, again, before we go to refit, I will finish up the storage now that I can show you that. So, obviously, medium, don't have any. Light, we have this 20-tonner. It will show you the current structure, which is 176. This is the structure that is completely intact and ready because it is stored, so it had to have been fully repaired before you store it. The armor says 0. We're about to ready it up to see what that, does. But more importantly, all this information is the same. All this information is the same. It's the number of hard points you have. If they're all the same number, especially like if they're all the same number and it's larger than, say, 2 or 3 or 4, it's definitely an Omni-Mech. You can confirm it's an Omni-Mech or not by looking at the arm actuator limit. If it doesn't say arm actuator limit, it has full-on lower arms and hands for both arms. If it says actuator limit, it is limited to that. So this mech is upper on left and right arm only. It is not an Omni-Mech, otherwise that would say Omni, so this mech will never have a lower arm actuator to increase melee damage or accuracy of arm-mounted weapons or anything like that. This entire blurb right here is dependent on the chassis. It's just fluff for the most part. It can tell you what it's equipped with. So if you're trying to decide between 3 different chassis and say it actually tells you one has an ultra autocannon and you want to try to get the ultra autocannon by salvaging it, then that would be the one you build. Yeah, I definitely need to stop that chatter. It's annoying. Anyway, it shows the quirk, narrow low profile, but it doesn't tell you what that does, so you'll have to ready it up to find out unless you just know offhand. Narrow low profile is actually one of my favorite quirks, so I just know that it's +1 defense. Drop cost multiplier, it'll show the impact on how much it'll cost to drop. So this Hornet costs 3% less than a mech that has a 1.0 drop cost multiplier, even if it's got the same value of equipment on it. The base tech number here is basically the recommendation for how much mech tech you have before trying to build from scrap. So if you have scrapped mech salvage, or if you have mech salvage, like partial salvage scraps that you're putting together, this is the base recommendation to get it not completely destroyed. So that is a recommendation. I don't think I've ever run into a situation where I was unable to put pieces together even if I didn't have that amount of tech. So unless they change that, that's basically just a thing you can pay attention to if you don't have a clue. But in general, when you're putting mech salvage together, higher mech tech is better, and part of the reason for that is you can barely see down here at the very bottom. Limb repair, 32%. Item recovered, 49%. What that means, and there's actually more things that are just off the screen because, yeah, can't scroll it for any reason. But that means that the legs and arms each will roll to see when you put it together. Again, if we didn't store it, if this was partial salvage. At our current mech tech, the limb repair would be 32%. So each arm and each leg would roll a 1 through 100. And if it's equal to or less than 32%, that arm will not be missing. The item recovered is like that, except it rolls for each item specifically in a location that is not destroyed. So if the limb repair roll for your right arm, for example, is not a good enough roll to have it repaired, if it's gone because you rolled too much, basically. If you didn't get the 32%, so the right arm is gone, every item in the right arm is guaranteed to also be gone. There's a little bit of weird stuff that happens sometimes with like center torso or you know, whatever specialty weapons, but they're completely revamping special equipment and melee equipment and stuff with the next save break, so can't really comment too much on it, but I can definitely say if you have a large laser in the right arm and the limb is not recovered and the limb is destroyed whenever you build it, that laser is guaranteed to be destroyed. If the right arm is successfully intact whenever you put the salvage together, it has a 49% chance for that laser to also be intact. Now, intact does not mean good to go. If it's something that has multiple slots, it can still be crit. Basically, it rolls the item recovered chance per slot. So, in the example of a large laser, it's a one-slot item. So it has a single 49% chance to be intact. If, on the other hand, it's a rotary autocannon, and it has, 5 slots, each one of those slots will roll to be recovered, and enough of them have to be successfully recovered to get the weapon intact. So the larger the weapon is, the more slots the weapon takes up, the harder it is to successfully recover it. And that's about all I have to say about that, except for this little button, which you'll recognize it as the same scrap button. This can be used to break apart a chassis that you have stored. So if you have, say, 3 parts of a Timberwolf that you want to put together, and you currently are, have in decent repair a Timberwolf chassis that maybe you don't want for whatever reason, or Timberwolf's actually a bad example because it's an Omni. Let's say you have a Hunchback that has very few hard points, but you have the partial salvage to put together to have, for example, the laser Hunchback that has, I think, 6 energy hard points in its side torso. You may want to store the Hunchback that you currently have in decent repair, scrap it to keep the parts so that you can then use those parts to put together a different variant. Or you can just sell it for that value right there. Obviously, we're not going to do that because I want to show you readying up. So whenever you ready a mech that is stored, you click the ready button, it will take 1 day. It gets added to the timeline, and after you pass that 1 day, you can go to the Mechbay, and you will find that mech like this. Unless it's an Omni-Mech. Omni-Mechs are special. They have usually a set gyro engine, fusion core, and sometimes other set components. But if it's not an Omni-Mech, readying it from storage, it will not have a fusion core. It will not have any kind of specialist equipment upgrades of any kind. It will be just the stock, standard, bare mech. And obviously, without an engine core, you cannot drop it into a fight. So you then have to take the time to actually drop in an engine core and spend that time and C-bills to get it ready to drop again. And again, you can't drop it without weapons. So you can see, as you start adding things, it's taking more and more time. So you can't just store a mech and then ready it up and immediately drop it. It takes a little bit more forethought than that. But that is the storage screen. So that, I believe, leaves us with just the refit screen. And to make it more interesting, I'm actually going to store all the things. Again, I'm just going to reload the save before I continue on with the playthrough. But we're going to look at the Bushwhacker here. So we open up the Bushwhacker into the refit screen. And we're just going to go across the top and then work our way down. Top left corner, you'll notice the same portrait, the same name, the same chassis type, the same variant, all of that. This is the tonnage distribution, how much you've used, and how much is total available. This does not mean you have 55 tons of equipment. This is including the weight of the structure, the weight of the armor. Like, if you strip all the armor off of it, you can see the armor is only taking up 3.5 tons. Wait, Math is wrong. 5.5 tons. So the armor, if we just, undo that, the armor of this mech alone is taking up 5.5 tons. And it's not even maxed out. So if we add more armor, it takes additional tonnage. It also includes the structure. It includes the engine core size, which by changing engine cores, you can very much drastically change the amount of tonnage you have available for other stuff. I like to call it boom room. But yeah, so the amount of weaponry and ammo you can have is partially dependent on the chassis you're running, but also very much dependent on the engine core and what kind of upgrades you have. But we'll get to all these specifics in a moment. Just that's what this up here means. And it is possible to have a partial tonnage available. Here you have 0.011 tons remaining. So that's one armor point of standard armor. Different specialist armors actually have different weights per point of armor, so that's something else to pay attention to later. But again, just trying to do simple, basic. I keep throwing in too much extra. This is how many tons you're using out of how many tons available, and this is just a breakdown of exactly how much you have left to work with. The modified just shows that you have changed something, which I, put it back exactly the way it was. So this is just in case you want to click validate. If I had done anything, like, say I took armor off there and put it over there, I would not be able to really tell from this at all, other than the fact that it says modified, so I know I changed something. If I don't want that changed, I can go back. If I want the change, I validate. You can also click the reset button, which sometimes works, like it just did. It put the armor values. You can see the back armor on the side, torsos is back to normal, back to what it was. Sometimes it glitches a little bit, and all of a sudden you're looking at a messed up paper doll. So I frequently don't really use it, but it is there if you want to use it. They might have fixed it since then. I haven't used it in a while. Anyway, this right underneath it is the breakdown of the hard points the mech has. Just like whenever you're looking at the basic Mechbay view. This button repairs all, so if you have a damaged or destroyed location, it repairs that. If you have a crit weapon, it repairs that. If you have a crit actuator, it repairs that. This button will repair everything. This button, as it says, strips all equipment. And that is everything. This is exactly the type of, this is exactly the state it would be if you took it out of storage. And you can see in the bottom right corner, just taking all the stuff off is costing us 48,150 C-bills. Not a lot, but it is something. Versus storing it where it costs nothing to do exactly this. Even what's it called? Readying it from storage doesn't cost any C-bills directly. It does take 1 day, which that's 1/30th of a financial report, so it costs something, but yeah. So that's that button. Likewise, the strip armor button that I showed you a minute ago does that. So you can see here, now that we've stripped all the armor and all of the equipment, just the base chassis on its own is 8.5 tons out of the 55 tons. So basically just the structure. Just the structure is 8.5 tons. And that's why if you have endo steel, you can see endo steel reduces the structure weight by 50%. Oh, right, gyro. Gyro also has base. I think the gyro's base weight is 10% of the chassis tonnage, so it would be 5.5, maybe? That doesn't sound right. Okay. So 50% reduction of structure would be 2.75 tons. That means the structure is 5.5 tons, which means the gyro for the 55-ton mech is by default 3 tons. There we go. Math. And once again, click the reset button. That's 2 out of 2. Revert changes worked, so I guess they might have fixed it. Cool. Max armor is a little wonky. It only maxes armor completely if you have enough tonnage to do so. So if we strip equip and then click max armor, every location goes to max. So you can see with no armor upgrade, no structure upgrade, just nothing but the maximum armor available, this is a 22.82 ton build with just armor. And then the restore as... Oh, they added a save and restore function. That's cool. So you can save builds and then restore them. That's pretty cool. Can I exit out? Yeah, escape works. Escape gets you out of that. But yeah, so you can actually save a build and then reuse it. I wonder if you can actually import saved builds from other playthroughs. That would be actually pretty cool. I'll have to look into that. I'm not going to have time to look into it before I upload, but yeah. I will mention it at some point later on if that actually is a thing you can import from, for example, other players or playthroughs or whatever. In any case, over here, funds, you recognize that's the same as most screens outside of combat, is the amount of C-bills you have available. This underneath that stock combat roll, it's a little misleading. In part because it's not the chassis that really makes a mech fall into a particular combat role, it's the way you've built it. So, also I would disagree with a lot of them. This one says Hero Mech because it's a special variant. But, yeah, a lot of the mech chassis have, like, fire support or brawler or whatever, and it's like, no, I built that brawler as an LRM boat, so it is not. So that can largely just be ignored, unless you're trying to get a vague idea of what the default build does, but most default builds are pretty bad, and I would recommend against using them without at least some modification. In any case, you'll notice these 6, and yes, I am just talking over it, I'm sorry, I will fix it by next time, but This over here is the same thing as outside, and it's just as accurate or inaccurate as outside. The listing here is everything you have available in the Argo to put onto this mech. And even if it can't use it, even if it didn't have any energy hardpoints, you would still be able to see that you have a small laser, 7 medium, etc. It would just be kind of grayed out where you wouldn't be able to put it on the mech. Oh my goodness. I seriously have never noticed them being this frequent. I'm very sorry, the callouts are continuous. Anyway, these buttons underneath the weapon highlight there show the different type of weapons that you can sort by. Autocannons, Gauss, artillery, lasers, PPCs, flamers, etc. You can just literally hover over them. If you're curious what it is, direct fire missiles, indirect fire missiles, cool. Ammo, same thing. Pretty much exactly the same thing. Except obviously it doesn't really have the lasers and stuff since they don't take. Although, I guess that would be under energy here. Chemical lasers, flamers, and plasma ammo, because some few energy weapons do use ammo. The internals, literally just a list of everything that is not a weapon that you can... well, actually, that's not quite true. This is everything that's not a weapon or a piece of equipment that you can put on a mech. Some stuff is overlapped. Jump jets, for example, are not. You can see here, we have the, various heat sinking and things. Here, we also have the various heat sinking and things. But here we also have the jump jets, whereas internals does not include the jump jets. So there's a slight variation. Some things are shared between internals and equip, some things are not. So if you're trying to look for something that you just know you salvaged at some point, try the other one, basically. The breakdowns do help. They have very much improved over the years, and you can basically break it down to whatever exact thing you're looking for. Pretty cool. But this is just a list of everything you have available to put on your mech. So it does not show anything that is on another mech. And just, I guess I can demonstrate that. We have an AMS and a small laser. If I put the AMS and the small laser on the Hornet, then, yep.
Right. I'll get it in the schedule.
If I go back to the Bushwhacker, even though the construction or the work isn't done on the Hornet, I still do not have the AMS or small laser left to put on anything else. Also, you'll notice I put an AMS on there with no ammo. Doesn't really care. It will pop, it will show the exclamation mark once it's done being built. Once you have finished putting on the AMS or the autocannon or whatever with no ammo or the wrong type of ammo or whatever, you will see a little blip saying, hey, you did something wrong. But you won't really know what that is until you go in. And actually, the message I saw was that we didn't have an engine core. So let's do that. Let's put the AMS in again. And now we should, when we go to validate... Okay, we also need heat sinks because it's only a 100 core. Man, I am putting so much time into just making 1 point. I apologize for that. But it's an important point. Because you will see... There. This mech mounts one or more weapons that require ammo, meaning you don't have it. You can also see it at the top, so it's very important that you pay attention to any warning signs that you see. The red ones, like when it doesn't have an engine core, the red ones mean you cannot drop it on a mission. The yellow ones mean you can drop it on a mission, but something's wrong. For example, the fact that it has an autocannon with no ammo. So, that means this build exactly as is, we can drop on a mission. You'll notice it has no weapons. All it has is an AMS that doesn't have ammo. If you're really desperate, you might still want to drop a mech that is in a situation like this, if only to draw fire away from your more valuable and important mechs. But generally speaking, it's a bad idea. Also worth noting, if you do not have any weapon systems, you cannot drop the mech. Even if it's a melee mech, and it has all sorts of fancy, fists and things, you still have to have some kind of weapon to be able to drop it. And that is a, detailed thing that you don't really need to worry about for a long while. If it comes up, then I've mentioned it. You'll probably have forgotten by then. I apologize. Now then, that is the entire list over here. It's just a list of everything you have that you can put into your mech. So, this little box here is about to disappear. Or rather, be changed. So, the rework that was slated for already, that has been delayed to, Christmas, is a rework that will put the specialist slots in the side torsos, I believe, with hand slots for handheld weapons and things in the actual arms that they go in. So, this specialist slot and this specialist slot will no longer be here. But the quirk should still be here, I believe. I also don't know if the rework is going to make specialist slot items cost tonnage or anything, so I'm just really not going to touch on it. If you have stuff to put it there until the save break, and then I'll release an update after the save break that will go over, the new handheld and specialist slot things. But for now, the one thing that's definitely not going to change terribly is the quirk. Every mech has a quirk. It does something. Some are more valuable than others. Some require you to build around a particular thing or not, but this one, narrow low profile, it's one of my favorites, in part because you don't have to do anything special with it. It just, by default, has +1 defense and minus 5% visibility. So, there you go. Straight up benefit, no matter what range you're being shot at, no matter what. Always just +1 defense and minus 5% visibility. Neat. Now then, each location is separated on this paper doll, and you can see each location has a variety of things. So I'm just going to go over the location general things and then go over a couple of specifics. So location has the name of the location, the amount of structure it has out of the amount of structure it should have. This number, I believe, has to be full. Like, you have to have 45 out of 45 to drop the mech in combat. Don't quote me on that. I don't recall off the top of my head if I have successfully dropped a mech that had structure damage or not. But I do know you can drop it with this armor slider all the way to 0. You don't have to have any armor to drop it, but I'm fairly certain you have to have the structure fully repaired. This box with the white bar that goes up and down is the armor slider. You will notice that each tonnage, 55-ton mechs can have up to 90 armor. 20-ton mechs can have considerably less. Every time you click the plus or the minus, it is moving 5 armor points, either adding or subtracting 5 armor points. And each, when you hold down shift and click it, it does it by ones. So you'll notice that you can go to 23 out of 90 to have exactly 0.4 tons remaining. I'm going to try this button again. It worked again. Cool. But yeah, so that's that. The armor current out of max. Plus and minus, if you hold shift, you can adjust armor points by a single armor point. And if you don't hold shift, it's by 5 by default. Underneath that, you'll see ballistic, energy, missile, support. That is how many hard points this particular location has. So this ballistic hardpoint is being taken up. The 1 out of 1 means there is 1 ballistic weapon taking up the hardpoint. It is this AC-10. If the arm gets destroyed, obviously the weapon that is on that limb also gets destroyed. Now, moving down from there. Well, actually, that's the same for... those are the things for every single location. And yes, you can have hard points for weapons in the legs. It's weird, but some mechs do. Now then, arms specifically. This is where that arm actuator limit comes from. So the Bushwhacker having actuator limit of lower arm means it has shoulder, upper arm, lower arm. As far as I know, every single mech has shoulders and upper arms, but lower arms and hands are sometimes there, sometimes not. If it's an Omni-Mech, it will start off with just shoulder and upper arm, but there are Omni-Mech lower arms and hands that you can add to it. You'll also notice that there is a certain number of slots. So, this number of slots in each arm is the same between chassis. There are a few slightly different ones, like quad mechs, the mechs that have 4 legs that walk around on all 4s, have a slightly different distribution of slots, but standard walking 2-legged bipedal mechs will all have the same number of slots per location. So if your mech has lower arms and hands, at least, again, prior to the save break that's going to rework handheld stuff, you will have less slots for weapon systems if you have lower arm and hand. Now, 2 slots out of however many slots this is not much, but it can actually make the difference, especially on, say, an assault mech where you have tonnage for a lot of different weapons. Mostly for light and medium mechs, you don't really run out. Now, you'll notice that right now, this right arm says Indosteel on 6 of its slots. That is because the Indosteel here has 14 fixed slots reserved. Now, what that means is not it has to be 6 in this arm. I think even if I just drop it... No. If I drop it and put it back, will it be different? Nope. Okay. So I don't know why it distributes like that. I'm sure there's some reason or something. Maybe it has to do with how many slots are available or something, because I noticed this has 3 slots available, 3 slots available, 3 slots available. The important thing is the slots that are reserved, most of them can move. So if we put it back like this, you'll notice those slots have now moved. It doesn't really matter, but it does matter if you run out of slots, because if you have no available slots, you can't put more stuff in. So if you have an armor upgrade, actually, do we have? Yeah, we have ferrofibrous. So if we put in this armor upgrade and we put in the endosteel, you'll notice we only have 3 slots that are still black. That means we can only put in 3 slots worth of whatever. If we, for example, changed this medium laser to a... okay, we don't have any... Okay. If we change this LRM5 to an LRM15, we now have 1 slot available. And yes, I know I'm going over tonnage, I'm just making a point. If we then try to replace the machine gun, we don't have any ballistics to replace it with. Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna have a hard time making my point. Basically just, I mean, jump jets. There we go, jump jets take slots. Right, equip. So if I start trying to put jump jets in, there's 1 jump jet, and now we're out of slots. So because of that, you can sometimes run into situations where you've saved tonnage by putting in Indo or Ferro or a larger gyro or an Engine XL or whatever. So you have tonnage available, but you've run out of slots, and that's what's called being slot locked. So at that point, you either remove something that's reducing your tonnage, or armor up if you have tonnage available and you don't already have max armor. There's various ways to try to manage your tonnage and slots effectively, but for the most part, when you're dealing with light and medium mechs, you're not really going to run into being slot locked too often. Again, like, I ran out of tonnage, so I can't actually put an LRM-15. So even if I do have, you know, the jump jets with the Pharaoh, I still am going to be able to put more jump jets than I have tonnage for. So slots is something you mostly have to worry about later on in the game. Earlier in the game, it's less important. Tonnage is the usually deciding factor early game. And once you've gotten the hang of tonnage and are messing with builds, you probably don't really need these guides anymore, so yeah. There are some pieces of equipment, though, where the slots are, I think they call them reserved slots. Actually, the XL engine should. 6 engine slots reserved. So, yeah. This says engine slots. It's 3 in each side torso because it's an XL engine. I can't remember if fixed slots say something different for, like, stealth. There's types of stealth armor that will have 1 location or 1 slot per location locked. For example, if you have a head hardpoint and you are using stealth armor and that slot is taken by the stealth armor, it cannot be moved, and so you can't use the head hardpoint unless you reduce the number of slots taken by your standard cockpit, but that's beyond the scope of this episode. So, yeah. Other than that, it's basically as stated. Hip, upper leg, lower leg, foot is standard on every leg. So there are specialists. For example, the Talon here. There are specialist things that can go over thereby replacing a default foot actuator. So this Talon it weighs 25% of 5.5 tons. But it gives a 10% increase to kick damage, a 5% increase to kick attack stability damage, and 25% increased death from above damage, and 12% increased death from above stability damage. Death from above, in case you didn't know, is a special tactic where you use jump jets to fly in the air and land on an enemy mech. It's reckless, it's dangerous, but sometimes it's just too fun not to. That joke aside, but yeah. Center torso, again, if you strip everything, you'll see armor, structure, cooling, gyro, engine heatsink, and until you install a fusion core, it's showing 2 red, but fusion cores only take 1 slot, so boom. Now, I think I've basically covered, I guess I can also go over life support A, fire control, cockpit, sensors, life support. That's the standard cockpit. There are specialty cockpits that, for example, only take 2 slots. There are specialty cockpits that remove the life support. There are specialty cockpits that can go center torso or head mounted. I believe those all replace the gyro with the cockpit. Whether it's in the head or the center, I believe the gyro disappears and the head or center is now the location of the gyro or something. It's specialist equipment is special. A lot of it plays by its own rules. And now the last thing I'm going to cover, I think, before I call it an episode, is the engine core size. So, first of all, every engine core, the tonnage listed, includes 10 heat sinks. It doesn't matter what kind of heat sinks they are. So, you saw we have, you may have seen, we have a compact heatsink kit. This mech also was equipped with a double heatsink kit. What that means is if you put a compact heatsink kit where a standard compact heatsink, a standard compact heatsink weighs 3 tons and takes 1 slot. If you have the compact heatsink kit, the first 10 heatsinks will take no tonnage. Now, it's not 10 external heatsinks. That includes however many the engine core has internally. So you'll see here it says external heat sinks required, 6. It even says explicitly, these heat sinks are weightless. So we can put these 6 compact heat sinks into the mech. And those compact heat sinks do not contribute at all to our tonnage. And this is honestly the most value you get out of a compact heatsink kit, is being able to use less than, an engine core smaller than a 250, which is 250 core and above rated, always have 10 heat sinks built in and sometimes have slots for more. But yeah, the minus 6 heatsink ton, that just means 6 heat sinks are required outside of the engine, and their tonnage is covered by the engine tonnage. So, that is engine heat sinks. Now, you'll notice I mentioned the 250 rating. I think it started with, 275. So a 275 rated core, I put that in, and these heat sinks now each weigh 3 tons, which is a lot. However, if you just have the compact heatsink kit, all 10 slots, all 10 engine heat sinks are now compact heat sinks for all intents and purposes. They're weightless, but they are compact heat sinks. Which brings our cooling, our heat efficiency for compact heat sinks is 60 heat. So it is still an upgrade, even without using any external heat sinks, to the default 30 heat sinking of a standard engine with its standard 10 heat sinks. Whew, that was a lot of info dump. I'm going to give you a second to internalize all of that for a second before I get on to... Well, actually, I'll throw in this last one. This engine core, 275, says +1 HS capacity, cap. That means it can have an engine heatsink +1, and no more. So if you have an engine heatsink +2 or +3 or whatever, you cannot put it in a mech that has a 275 core. If you have, I think, a 400 core, you can have +6. So you can save a lot of slots by using that engine heatsink slot. But worth noting, if you pay attention to the 37.5 up there, where'd it go? The engine heatsink +1 does actually take a ton. So this +1 heatsink capacity, it allows you to use this heatsink slot to add additional heatsinks. However, you do pay tonnage for those. And actually, you'll see if you hover the engine heatsink slot, you'll see the breakdown what type of heat sinks it has equipped, the internal that are built into the engine, which is free 10, additional 1 out of 1 because we're using the engine heatsink slot. So if we remove that, you'll see internal 0 out of, or additional 0 out of 1. And that's heat sinks. And also I can demonstrate the double heatsink kit. So if I put it in there, it is now double heat sinks. So there you go. That's a lot, I know. I will slowly go through once I continue the guide series. The comprehensive guide series will include episodes where I go into the mech lab, and based on the equipment and the mechs that I have, I will do adjustments, explain my thought process behind every single adjustment. So if a lot of this has gone over your head, don't worry. This is the one thing that I'm not going to explicitly go over and over again every time it comes up. The engine core size. The engine core size primarily is used to determine how fast the mech moves. So, this engine core 275 results in ABBA here having a 5 move, 7 sprint movement capacity. If I replace it with this 120 core, you'll notice the movement drops down to 2 movement, 3 sprinting. The reason why is because you take the rating, so 120, and you divide the tonnage by it. So even though we're only using 25 tons, it still pays attention to the full 55 ton max tonnage of the chassis. So 120 divided by 55 is basically 2. Because 2 times 55 is 110, which you can't put another 55 into 120. I don't think I need to explain how division works, but that's the quick version. Is you take the chassis, multiply its tonnage by however many you can get into the core, and that's how many move. And then sprint is 150% that move. Now, you'll notice the movement here says 54 meters, 81 meter sprint. If I put the 100 core in, not only does it drop down to 1 hex, 2 hex sprint, but it's 45 meters, 68 meters. Better example would probably be the 275, 280. Yeah. So the default 275 is 125 meters, 187. The 280, which is only 5 higher, is 127, 190. So there was a very marginal movement increase. It was not enough to increase the number of hexes that you can move or sprint by default, but it does factor into going up and down elevation, going over rough terrain, going through forests, etc. Also, every terrain type has different penalties for move than it does for sprint. For example, trying to sprint through water hinders your sprint movement more than trying to walk through water. So sometimes you can actually be in a situation where moving is actually going to bring you further than trying to sprint. It's very unlikely, it's very rare, but it can happen just because of the way the rounding works. We are working on a hex-based battlefield with actual meters of movement being calculated. So a little bit of rounding weirdness happens occasionally. But it is worth noting that a lot of times you will be able to move just as far or just about as far as you can sprint in water, but you don't lose the accuracy of moving versus sprinting. So we'll cover all of that in explicit detail once we start dropping into missions, but just that's how the base movement numbers are figured out. Engine core rating divided by chassis size. So, for example, again, this is a 5-7, 5 move, 7 sprint, and yes, the hexes is the more important number. I just want to make sure you're completely aware that that meter of movement does change even if the hexes don't, and it can come into play in different situations. Just not when you're moving across, solid flat ground in the open. Then a 280 core will not get you any further than a 275 in that situation. Now then, this is part of the reason why lighter mechs are naturally faster. You'll see with a 20-ton mech, if we put in a 100 rated core, we're already at 5.7 with a 100 rated core as compared to the 275. The 280 core, we can't even put in because the chassis is too small. I forget where it shows. I'm pretty sure it shows somewhere. I thought it showed somewhere what the maximum engine core size was. Huh. Well, anyway, there is a maximum core size for light mechs versus heavier mechs and assault mechs. You can literally put a tiny little core in an assault mech, and it will just not really be able to move. It'll basically be a stationary turret moving or sprinting 1 hex a turn, which is viable sometimes if you're not playing challenge mode like I usually do. And you just have an Atlas with all the armor in the world and a 50 core, and literally it can only sprint for 1 hex, but it has so many weapons that it just kills things instantly. It's viable. Just understand that you will have very high repair costs, because if you're not moving, you're not generating evasion, and if you're not generating evasion, almost every shot will hit you. The counter to that is this 5.7 from the 100 core can be upgraded to a 200 core to get a whopping 1015. This will absolutely get you into max evasion territory, where your maximum evasion may end up being lower than the evasion you're trying to generate. I think off the top, I think I actually included that last episode as a post note. I'm pretty sure it's like 13 hexes is 6 evasion, 14 hexes might be 6 evasion. Might be 12 actually. No, it was I forget, it was a certain meter breakpoint. Yeah, no, it was something. Yeah, future me may or may not put it here, but the key thing is you generate more evasion by having a higher movement. However, you can see the engine core alone, a 200-ton core in a 20-ton mech, is essentially the entire mech. So without any other equipment to reduce tonnage, you can't bring weapons with a 200 core. Now, if you then put in ferrofibrous and endosteel, you can see we can actually have a 200 core in this thing and a medium laser, as well as missile hardpoint. Nope, LRM5's too much. I mean, if we had a tag, we could put a tag in it. But yeah, literally the choice of how big of a core to put in a mech is partially based on how much evasion you want to generate, and partially based on how much boom room you want. Also, obviously, if you want to max armor, actually I think we should be able to mostly max the armor with just the laser. And you can see we actually clicked the max armor button. It did not max out all of the armor because reasons. Basically, we just didn't have enough tonnage for the entirety of all of the armor. So yeah, perfect example. We have a 200 core, max armor, and a small laser. So that means this mech will be able to go zoom, 10-15, but it will have 15 damage max. Now, charge attacks, the melee attack called a charge, does damage and stability damage based on how many hexes you moved in addition to the size of your chassis. So, a 20-ton mech with a 200 core will be able to hit and charge much more effectively than a 100-ton mech with a 200 core. Because even though it'll have 5 times the tonnage, it will be moving at 2-3 instead of 10-15. So, that's a thing you can do with a mech that has basically all of its tonnage spent on just an engine core. And with that, I think I'm going to leave it. As I said, for tomorrow, I will reload the save that has all of the mechs unchanged. And yeah, that will be... Tomorrow we're going to... Not tomorrow, Friday. Well, actually tomorrow, depending on when I manage to get this uploaded, it might be going live Wednesday, it might be going live Thursday, we'll see. But yeah, I think I will go through the Mechbay and actually modify the mechs that I have in the way that I would at the start of a playthrough, which will include a discussion of the navigation screen. Or if that's just way too long, oh my goodness, I spent an hour and a half talking about the Mechbay. Yep, sounds about right. I do love the Mechbay. But yeah, tomorrow we will definitely go over navigation, possibly initial setup, because unlike the Mech Lab Monday series, where I just go through and build everything all at once, I'm going to, for the Comprehensive Guide series, do the exact thing that I would do with this start for an optimal playthrough, which consists of trying to make a mech or two as good as possible, and just dropping the mechs that will be good enough until I get the salvage and the time and the C-bills to then continue modifying everything. But that will start next time. I will definitely discuss navigation. There's a good bit to that. Based on how long that takes, we will either jump in the Mechbay or not. But yeah, that's next time. For now, that has been your episode of the Comprehensive Guide series for Roguetech. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, have a good one.